poetry at the IIC series, which is to commemorate the IIC's Diamond Jubilee. That's actually over now, so this is going to be one of our last poetry evenings, and we're so delighted to have with us today Tishani Doshi. She has published 7 books of fiction and poetry, including Small Days and Nights, which was shortlisted for the Ondaatje Award, and a New York Times Bestsellers Editor's Choice, and a collection of poems, A God at the Door, which was shortlisted for the Forward Poetry Prize of 2021. She's going to be reading from A God at the Door today, and there are copies available outside too. She was a lead dancer with the Chandralekha Group in Madras for 15 years. She is currently a visiting associate professor at NYU Abu Dhabi. She will be joined in conversation after she's done her reading by Sumana Roy, who is an associate professor of English and creative writing at Ashoka University. She's also a well-known poet, actually. She's author of How I Became a Tree, a work of non-fiction, Missing, a novel, My Mother's Love and Other Stories, and 2 poetry collections, Out of Syllabus and VIP, Very Important Plant. So thank you so much for joining us. Over to you, Tishani. Spotlight.
Hi everyone, thank you for coming. I thought I'd do actually, I feel so high up here, it's a strange stage. I thought I'd do some mix of poems, so not just from the new book, but a new poem and some older ones as well. And going through the list, I think it's always an interesting process for a poet to say, well, what poems will I choose for this audience? And you never know what kind of a mood you're going to be in. But anyway, I thought I would pick up on certain keywords and obsessions, things that I return to in my work. And to begin, in honor of a teacher of mine in graduate school, who was a great poet, but a bit of a snob, and he said, no grandmother poems allowed. I thought I'd start with a grandmother poem. And this is not about my grandmother, but it's somebody I met in Trinidad, in Port of Spain, many years ago. And essentially, when she found out that I was from Madras, my friend said, can you please come and meet my grandmother? Because her ancestors had come many generations ago as indentured labor to work in Trinidad, and there was this strange moment for me of I go into her bathroom and I saw a tube of Vico Vajradanti, and I think it was a kind of some either reversal of the Proustian's Madeleine or some version of it, whereby looking at that tube of toothpaste was funneling into someone else's memory, a collective memory, a question of what do we take with us and what do we carry, because no one in that family had gone back to India, and yet there were these markers of things they had brought. So this poem, I think, tries to talk about some of that, including my continuous love and return and strange relationship of my own with Madras. The only thing you need to know about this poem is it features a particular tree, and Sumona's here, and I should have the proper name of the tree, but I don't. But it's this beautiful flowering tree that I saw in Trinidad. It's called the poi tree, and they blossom in springtime, and they have these amazing pink and yellow blossoms, and they arrive at the first shower of rain after the dry season. And the drier the season, the more impressive the bloom, and it's a synchronous flowering. It happens all at once, and it's a miracle of a sight. So this is Love and Other Seasons. I am in a house in Port of Spain, and the wind that blows through here is Madras. My friend's grandmother keeps calling me Madras, asks whether I speak Madras. Have I always lived in Madras? Says I walk Madras, and around me the riverine sea brine smell of Madras. Her people came to these shores from a place that was once Madras. And even though my lineage of this place, whose name has changed, is distinctly un-Madras, I tell her how I eat Madras. My blood, no matter what it is or where it goes, finds its way home to Madras. That afternoon in Trinidad has turned into an old painting where the landscape must do all the hard work of emotion while the people float through, giving nothing away. Say this were a rain-drenched canvas and you saw peacock, frog, swinging earring. You would understand a woman leaves home to meet her beloved, nothing of desire in her eyes. But notice how thin her waist from wasting. Regard the roil of monsoon cloud and moist green earth. You can almost hear from every syrinx of every forest bird a collective squall of longing. Here in this house of arches, all I can see are poetries ablaze, glamoring the streets like oil lamps welcoming the goddess home. She is whispering to leave behind that ship and that other ship, all the collapsing and drowning, small tin roofs, seeds smuggled over in hems, backs bent over, estates and plantations, labor of sweet-soiled sugar, grit on tongue. Sitting with my friend's grandmother, it is like ancestor acknowledging ancestor. We untie the ropes around our ankles and replace them with bells. Our bodies, our planets, crumbling mansions, trying to survive the long season of summer. We walk through sacred groves, ka-chink, ka-chink of anklets signaling our arrival, the way rain is heard before it is felt. Imagine a bird that subsists only on raindrops, how it waits the whole year to lift its beak to the clouds. Imagine the parch, the way home can be a fist around the heart, the way return is both homecoming and distant island. This is from my first book, Countries of the Body, and it's called Homecoming. I wrote it very soon after the tsunami, and it was a sense of feeling that a usually noisy city had suddenly held its breath. Homecoming. I forgot how Madras loves noise, loves neighbors and pregnant women and gods and babies and Brahmins who rise like fire hymns to sear the air with habitual earthquakes. How funeral processions clatter down streets with drums and rose petals dancing death into deafness. How cars in reverse sing jingle bells and scooters have larynxes of lorries. How even color can never be quiet. How fisherwomen in screaming red with skirts and incandescent third eyes and bangles like rasping planets, and Tamil women on their morning walks in saris and jasmine and trainers can shred the day and all its skinny silences. I forgot how a man lying under the body of a tattered boat could ask for promises, how they could be as silent as the sea on a wounded day, altering the ground of the earth as simply as the sun filtering through the monsoon rain, dividing everything. This poem is called A Fable for the 21st Century, and it has an epigraph by E.M. Choran, which is, "Existing is plagiarism." So, existing is plagiarism. A Fable for the 21st Century. Do I have it? Yeah. There is no end to unknowing. We read papers, wrap fish in yesterday's news, spread squares on the floor so puppy can pee on Putin's face. Even the mountains cannot say what killed the Sumerians all those years ago. And as such, you should know that blindness is historical, that nothing in this poem will make you thinner, richer, or smarter. Myself, I couldn't say how a light bulb worked. But if we threw you head first into the past, what would you say about the secrets of chlorophyll? How would you expound on the aggression of sea anemones, the battle of Placé, Boko Haram? Language is a peculiar destiny. Once, at the desert's edge, a circle of pilgrims spoke of wonder, their lives dark with mud and hose. They didn't know you could make perfume from rain, that human blood was more fattening than beer. But their fears were ripe and lucent, their clods of children plentiful, and God walked among them knitting sweaters for injured chevaliers. Will you tell them how everything that's been said is worth saying again? How the body is helicoidal, spiriting on and on. How it is only ever through the will of nose, bronchiole, trachea, lung, that breath outpaces any sadness of tongue. Love poem. Ultimately, we will lose each other to something. I would hope for grand circumstance, death or disaster, but it might not be that way at all. It might be that you walk out one morning after making love to buy cigarettes and never return, or I fall in love with another man. It might be a slow drift into indifference. Either way, we'll have to learn to bear the weight of the eventuality that we will lose each other to something. So why not begin now, while your head rests like a perfect moon in my lap and the dogs on the beach are howling? Why not reach for the seam in this South Indian night and tear it just a little so the falling can begin? Because later, when we cross each other on the streets and are forced to look away, when we've thrown the disregarded pieces of our togetherness into bedroom drawers and the smell of our bodies is disappearing like the sweet decay of lilies, what will we call it when it's no longer love? The Art of Losing. This is inspired by Elizabeth Bishop's poem One Art, And it goes, the art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. The art of losing. It begins with the death of the childhood pet, the dog who refuses to eat for days, the bird or fish found sideways dead. And you think the hole in the universe caused by the emission of your grief is so deep it will never be rectified. But it's only the start of an endless litany of betrayals. The cruelty of school, your first bastard boyfriend, the neighbor's son going slowly mad. You catch hold of losing and suddenly it's everywhere. The beggars in the street, the ravage of a distant war in your sleep. And when grandfather hobbles up to the commode to relieve himself like a girl without bothering to shut the door, you begin to realize what it means to exist in a world without. People around you grow old and die, and it's explained as a kind of going away to God or rot or to return as an ant, depending on the spiritual way you were raised. And once again, you're expected to be calm about the fact that you'll never see the dead again, never hear them enter a room or leave it, never have them touch the soft parting of your hair. Let it be your parents' advice. It's nothing. Wait till your favorite aunt keels over in a shopping mall, or the only boy you loved drives off a cliff to survive, but never to walk again. That'll really do you in. Make you want to slit your wrists in a metaphorical way, of course, because you're strong and know that life is about surviving these things. And almost all of it would be bearable if it would just end at this. But one day your parents will sneak into the garden to stand under the stars and fade like the lawn into a mossy kind of gray. And you must let them. Not just that, you must let them pass into that wilderness and understand that soon you'll be called aside to put away your paper wings, to fall into that same oblivion with nothing, as if it were nothing. Thank you. So yeah, these are poems from 3 collections, and then I'll read a few from A God at the Door, and then Sumana and I will talk. I think I'll do, what should I do? I'll do a poem called, just to change gears a bit, I'll do a poem called Why the Brazilian Butt Lift Won't Save Us. For those of you who don't know about the Brazilian butt lift, I can tell you that neither the poet nor the poem recommends it. Okay, it's a kind of surgery. Why the Brazilian butt lift won't save us. The body refuses happiness. That was once upon a time. That was long ago when you could run naked through a field without consternation, you and your perfectly sized baby parts. The body grows dissatisfied once it starts towering over dogs and staring into the hearts of kitchen counters. Pretty soon your altar body is calling from a downtown phone booth saying, "Listen, baby, you need to step up the retinoids." We know, don't we, that a forest is being truncheoned as we speak, that a girl in that forest is being truncheoned too, a girl or 100, that all the words we have for my heart can't take it anymore, won't be able to describe what happens to the body at the end of that. Still, the body wants to be glorious while it can. It sees lips burgeoning like a hokusai wave and thinks, I'll have some of that. It sees bones Caravaggio might have dreamed of, and micro-bladed eyebrows, and neat marble apples the size of a generously cupped hand, and says yes, yes, yes. But mostly it sees Kim Kardashian's ass rising like a mountain out of the Atlantic and thinks, I too want to oversee a metropolis. And why shouldn't it? Aren't we all trying to get to a time before the blemishes, when the body was carefree with no stretch marks and pristine platelet-rich hair, an origami crane built to withstand the damaging effects of light, gusting over thermals to fly against any mushroom cloud? So what's a few small wounds to the forehead? What's a needle the size of your life? Sorry, I was a bit mean to Kim Kardashian, but no, just... okay. This poem is inspired by letters, and essentially I was commissioned to write a poem to commemorate India's involvement in the Great War, and I was reading the letters home that these soldiers had written, and so the poem is sort of a kind of amalgamation of some of these things. And I'll just quote one small excerpt of a letter. It's from a man called Kala Khan, who writes to his friend Iltaf Hussain on the 27th of December, 1917. What more am I to say? Our kind-hearted Sarkar has done everything possible for us to protect us from the cold. We are each provided with 2 pairs of strong, expensive boots. We have whale oil to rub on our feet, and for food, we are provided with live Spanish sheep. In short, the Sarkar has accumulated many good and wonderful things for our use. Many good and wonderful things. History, too, has a hard time remembering the black waters they crossed, the small mountain villages emptied of men. Death was different then. History is always reinventing itself. Say what you will, but clouds have remained more or less the same. And leaving home is still leaving home, whether it's on a jet plane or climbing the steep path behind the house with a roll of bedding on your back. But to die in a faraway place whose name you can't pronounce, for a king who isn't really yours, is a sadness history still hasn't figured out. History has been pushing for republics since Lucius Junius Brutus, but men are hardy is the point, and bull-headed. And you'd think the glories of lice making mansions in their shirts was a paradise they could do without. That trench living would make them walk across the front with arms held high, saying, "Take me quick, I wish only to enter the realms of God." History tries not to be sentimental, although letters give things away. One fool longed for a flute. The world is burning, but he wants to play. Others were mercenaries, spies. The wise asked for opium, but right sweets or dainties, they said, otherwise the package might not reach. History needs to forget the dead who cover the earth like heaps of stones, who write, "Mother, is my parrot still alive? Mother, do not go wandering madly." Sometimes it feels as though the rain has been falling all your life, and the girl you married will tire of tending the cattle. Do not worry. This is war, where the women, like metaphors, remain steadfast and beautiful. In history's version, she sits under the peepal tree, your Victoria Cross pinned to her sari. She has been waiting since 1918, and she is waiting still. So let us speak about love the way we always have, by asking, "Have you eaten, darling? And what price did you get for the goats? And of course, I miss you, but the earth is hard and the sky distant, and if I had wings, I'd fly to you. In Marseille, they said we looked like kings. History cannot say what happens to men at war, so listen. At night, I feed on stars. Do not ask about the cold. They have given me whale oil for my feet, and someone told me if I carried a piece of raw onion into battle, the bullets would not find me." Thank you. So I'll end with two short poems. I've been experimenting with concrete poems in a kind of my own tradition of Chitrakavya. So this is a tiny little poem called The Comeback of Speedos, and it was inspired by a news item, and it sort of brought back some interesting childhood memories. So this is the shape of the poem. It looks like, supposed to look like a pair of Speedos. So yeah. The Comeback of Speedos. I'll keep this brief. I remember the shock of Mr. G's tiger striped trunks in the Madras Gymkhana Club. Nothing to conceal, everything to declare, like a Mills and Boone hero. Shiver of ball and sack, acres of hairy scrub. We could not imagine such freedom for ourselves, to slice through chlorinated depths with a little basket of dim sum on display. We were girls. To open our legs was treason. We held our breath. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think we'll leave it there. And sorry if I've ruined dim sum forever for you. Okay. Sure. And some handheld mics. Yeah.
Gitanjali is here, right? Yeah. Gitanjali has read out Tishani Doshi's bio for you. So it's a bit like the Aadhaar card thing, unless one kind of declares what she's done in her public life. It seems we are unable to enter into any kind of real interaction with her. But I want to share a few things with you which are outside this Aadhaar card regime. I made a few notes yesterday, thinking about how long I've known Tishani, though this is only the second time I think I'm meeting you. There are a few things that make Tishani a remarkable person, and she knows that I'm not flattering her. I think you will do too by the time I'll be able to convince you by the time I finish. And I say this about Tishani without making it only about Tishani, because these characteristics that I find so wholesome and hearty in her, I think are absolutely essential to the creation of any robust literary culture, and that I find lacking in so much around us today. Tishani does one thing that very few Indian English writers do. She reads her contemporaries, not just her friends and family, but what we did as children, reading writers we didn't know. Tishani tries to make opportunities for some of these writers and their work to be made visible. It's a selfless trait, and one an older world took for granted once, but it's something that she continues to do. And then Tishani listens, a really rare trait in a writer today. So used are we to talking about ourselves. I first met Tishani in a poem. The day we went to the sea, mothers in Madras were mining the marina for missing children. You read out from that collection. I remember reading it about 15 years ago and hearing the sound of the sea in it. Now, poets have traditionally used the sibilant sound or the liquid R and L sounds to talk about water. Who was this person who was mining the M sound to talk about the sea and the effect of the tsunami on Madras? How had she managed to do this? Who really was this person? It turned out that we would soon be in an anthology together. We were brought together by an editor called Anita Roy from Zuban, who was an editor at Zuban then. It was an anthology of stories that would come to be called 21 Under 40. So Tishani, Nisha Susan, Meena Kandaswamy, I think Madhulika Little as well. And my first story, it was the first time I got published. And I felt very proud of myself for being in a book with writers such as Tishani. That was about 15 years ago. And this is what I wanted to share with you. It was a time when getting access to email addresses was very difficult. But I very slyly looked at her email address in that mass mail where we were copied, where Anita was writing to us. And I wrote to Tishani. I requested her for a copy of her first book of poems that she read out from a little while ago, because it wasn't available to buy in Shiliguri where I was. She sent it to me, of course, to a stranger, but with one wonderful inscription. She wrote, "I hope you will send me your first book when it is out." It took me a really long time to write that first book, but thank you for that note, Tishani. I share this with you just to give you a sense of the person Tishani is, that her bio doesn't or cannot. It's her natural trait to cheer and support strangers. Thank you all for joining us today. It's a rare opportunity for all of us to cheer and support Tishani for the various things she has been to us. I'll begin with a very basic question. What does your name mean, Tishani? And are you aware of the poetic in it? And has the poetic in it guided you in some way?
I think so my name is made up as far as I know, although in Sri Lanka, I think there are some Tishanis that I've come across, and when I asked them what it means, I didn't get an answer. But I know that it was given to me by my Fai, my dad's sister, and she was basically trying to combine several names, and she was coming up with different sounds. And finally, I think because my mother is Welsh, and the name Shan is couched in Tishani, and Shan is a Welsh name. And the A and I is a very common, Ishani, Shivani, Nishani. So Tishani seemed like a good fit, and they liked it. And I think I've always liked my name, and it's, I don't think everyone who's had a made-up name can say that, I think sometimes that experiment can go very wrong, you don't know. But I feel in a way that my name has always suited me, and that I've carried it along very happily. So yeah, I don't know about the sense of poetic, but I think that certainly for someone who obsesses and thinks a lot about this question of one's relationship of self to the world, and this question of belonging and identity and all of this stuff, it seems very apt to have a name that kind of combines some of those ideas, I suppose, or concerns.
After this trivial question, one more. It's a question I ask almost everyone, certainly those I come to like. I might forget your birthday. I don't. Yours is right after my mother's, so I remember your birthday. What do you like to eat? I know you've told me that Carlo cooks one meal and you the other. What? So I might forget your birthday, but I'll remember what you like to eat, so I want to know.
I think I love food. I love eating. I love the whole prospect of sharing bread, sharing a table, sitting and having conversation around the table. To me, that is the most wonderful activity ever. Last night I was around a beautiful table talking to wonderful people, and it felt like a welcoming. It felt like, oh, I'm in this moment, you're here, and there's nothing else, And unfortunately, despite all this, I think I had reached the age of about 33, and I had never cooked a meal for anybody. And I thought, how did it happen? I cooked for myself, but I'm not a good cook. I would cook dal rice and eat it for 1 week, and when I was a student, but badly, just really not a good cook, and didn't enjoy cooking. And for some reason I found this a very odd trait and irritated, because I love food. And I think the only thing that I can ascribe it to is that as a child it was some sort of early feminist move of seeing women in the kitchen, and I would always sort of scuttle over to the table when the men were eating in my granddad's house, because it was a large family, and on Sundays we met. And I was always hungry also, I still am. So then I would eat, and then I just thought, oh, this is better than being the one doing the rotlis and the papads and stuff. And then of course later you come to realize how essential it is to be able to know how to feed oneself and to feed others, and the joy in that. So I've slowly, it's a new thing over the last 10 years. I have a few things under my sort of belt, let's say. But I think the food that I love most is the food that somebody has cooked for me.
Tishani, most of us are familiar with your life in dance, and maybe for those who aren't, I'll let you use this question to kind of tell us how you came to dance very briefly. I'm more interested in, I know it's a quasi-cliche, as in how has dance affected your sense of poetry. But besides that, I think this is something that you've thought about. You've also written about it in passing, and probably are writing about it in the new book that I think you're working on. But I'm also, I would say I'm more interested in how your dogs affect your poetry and your writing in general, the form. So if it is dance that is giving spine to your poems in some way, the sound of insects in the wind, the sound of the dog's tongue lapping up water, how does that affect your poetic, or sense of the poetic? Because the natural world, as we've just found out, is very important in your poems.
You're asking me this at a really, I think, sensitive time for me. the pandemic was this real break of what I had up to then lived in my life as a very physical lived experience, whereby there was a very strong physical practice of yoga, kalari, dance, and writing. And then for some years, there just was nothing in these last 2-3 years. And I think I understood that there was a sense of how suddenly to go from this, how to write in a disembodied state, where I was not in my body in the way that I had previously been in my body, and how to find my way back in. And I think I'm still struggling. There's this sense of, and I think, you know, it was happening always, but, and I've written about it in various ways, this sense of catching up with oneself. And I think it's also just the fact that as writers, as, you know, we are considering the place of self in society, self in world, and the multiplicity of selves, right? And it just felt like this dimension had been removed by the lack of the physical effort of dance and the discipline of it. And I think in that way, that language is, I like to contain the language in me, and it's partly why I like to know my poems. I like to ingest them. I like to feel the sense that they are inside me, not that they have come from outside me, but then I swallow them back in. And so there is this real feeling of the body being that site of regeneration, and of some kind of growth. And I think that the dance that I was doing was really abstract, that allowed me to make these certain connections, which I miss. And I think in the sense of the role of the world outside, it has always been the desire to try and understand how to find connection in a deeply disturbing and disconnected time, how to make connection with oneself to another person or another being or a tree, or, you know, that sense of we're alive. And hello, clouds. Yes, answering back. And so there's really, it's a kind of moving and evolving relationship, but I think it's always the sense of playing catch up with one's own self. And writing was always a way to attempt to fix something. So the poem comes and it's sort of, you arrive at something, and then the poem stays. And of course you might change it, or it's that whole idea of the poem is never finished. But in a way, when it is in a book, you have, you know, tussled with it, and there you have agreed to let it be. And it exists, and that's a huge relief, because I think otherwise I'm constantly in a state of tussle, and then that tussle never goes away. And so writing is a way of finding a line, finding a curve, finding a shape, finding form, and then you know, allowing it to exist in the page, allowing it to be as a poem in my head, but just something that has been created. So in a way, it was really to do with breath, to do with movement, to do with time and space and all of these things that I was sort of really exploring a lot in my dance practice, that I think it feels now that one can't do without the other. And so I'm finding new ways of making those entry points.
Okay. I'll come to your latest collection. Its title, What is a Door for You, Tishani? And how many, or what have you seen outside the many doors that you have had to encounter in your life? I'm thinking particularly, I was very moved by the title. It reminded me of a song by Rabindranath Tagore, where he sees death outside the door and meeting the door or death right after the song. And some of your poems are annotated, obviously subconsciously, by that sense of meeting something or someone outside the door. You write about doors even when you are not writing about doors. For instance, in that poem about Kabul, set in Kabul. So what is a door for you? Who waits outside your doors? What do you see?
I mean, doorways are architecturally such a potent space, right? The idea of the threshold, that liminal space of entering from one world and entering into the interior space. And so they are kind of portals, and there is a sense of, on one hand, looking at the idea of the house, the idea of the inside space as a place of safety, but then knowing that it's not always so a place of safety, and that the house is a great space of danger for a lot of people. And what does that then mean? That even in that space of closing the door into your interior of the home, you are not safe. And how would that be? Then you are basically not safe in your body, right? So for me, the doorway is that kind of tunnel between in and out. And I was always thinking about it in a way of when I was reading about Sangam poetics and thinking about the interior world, the Aham and then the Puram, the poems that are of the interior, that are of love, that don't name anyone, that are these beautiful fragmentary verses, and then the sort of Puram outside poems which are about the kings and the names of the great kings and their deeds. And for me, interestingly, you talked about dogs, and because I have this relationship with these pie dogs, these beach dogs that are kind of mine but kind of free, they are always the little harbingers of moving freely in and out between the domestic space and then out into the wild. And they have always held that kind of magic that in a way I as a person can't, because they have a kind of freedom, but they're also in that dangerous outer world, and they kind of represent that movement that I also think about where are our safe spaces, what are our sacred spaces. I think about the door to my dance theater, where I would touch the threshold and agree that, okay, now I'm going into this space of dance, into this space of other time, into this rehearsal space. And I have to leave behind the world, but I can still hear the world because the chundal collar and the crows and the motorbikes on the beach, I can still hear. And so there's always a bit of leakage, and the door is a kind of physical manifestation of the in and out, the this and that. And I'm endlessly, sort of curious and inspired by that sense of it architecturally, whether it's the home or whether it's in a religious space, anywhere.
So your dogs are your Hermes-like figures then, moving between two worlds. How beautiful. Your previous book of poems was dedicated to your mother. This one is dedicated to a God at the Door, which is available outside for those of you who don't have a copy. Is dedicated to your father. It's a beautiful dedication. And I'm reading it for those of you who still don't have a copy. Tishani writes, "For my father Vinod, whose name means joy." Now, joy, pleasure, the pleasure seekers. How do you access joy and pleasure and ananda in a culture that is at some level hostile to all of these, particularly because it seems puritanical sometimes, this culture of censorship that we are forced to live in?
I think for me, one of the most interesting emotions is desire. And we're always told to keep desire at bay and to overcome desire or to not succumb to desire. But when I think of desire, I'm not thinking of it only in an erotic sense. I think of it in a sense of being filled with emotion, being filled with love, and having a relationship to the world and to people which is sensual, essentially, a feeling of sensuality as opposed to the kind of removing of that, which I see as a barren. So I think for creativity, you have to have desire. You have to be in love. You have to experience some kind of, I don't know if joy is the word, but you have to at least make some pinhole for wonder, otherwise I don't know whether there's a possibility for the lyric. And I think that because my instinct is to go into places of, I suppose, difficulty, you know, there's this sense of all these bombardments and all these various injustices or things that violences, everything, you know, death, all this stuff is here that we are trying to negotiate. And I feel that from this other side, this well, there has to be beauty, there has to be wonder, there has to be joy, or there has to be at least an acknowledgement that that is possible. Otherwise, it's like hitting the same musical note and you don't arrive at any journey. There's no movement in the poem for me, you know. So I feel like that's why I want to have movement in the poem, and that means being able to have a moment of laughter and then going into something maybe heavier or sadder. And it's not like I think, oh, I'm going to do this in the poem. That is just the instinctual way that the poem moves, you know. I mean, I wrote a poem called How to Be Happy in 101 Days, and I was determined to write a happy poem, and it just went in a completely, you know, different direction, very surreal, and it was, I would not say a terribly happy poem, but I think that I'm interested in these different registers and emotions, because as a reader, I want to feel those things. I want to be laughing on one side and crying on the other, and I want to be able to hold those contradictions and juxtapositions, because I think that's true to life.
You remember the time we went to this college in Goa, and after we'd finished reading our poems, a very young student told Tishani and me, "Why do you poets only write about sadness?" So we did have an answer, maybe that poem, I don't know whether he had read, you had written a poem by that.
I think that I've had different versions of that question in terms of like, you're a real pessimist, and I think sadness, yes, I agree to, but pessimism, no, because I think the act of writing a poem is an optimistic act in itself. I mean, real pessimism is when there is no poetry. So I think just that sense that, oh, I can write a poem, that the poem can exist, that the poem might reach another person, that it lives. That is a great act of optimism and a wonderful thing in itself, even if the poem itself is sad.
Yeah, it's revolutionary. I mean, to fight that pessimism with something, thinking that we can put something in place of that, replacing or to substitute that pessimism. The missing women, I think they are the subject of Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods. You also have a missing women poem in this new collection. What do you think it is about our generation of women? Meera has a book, K.R. Meera has a novel about a missing woman, Anuradha Roy. I've written a novel about a missing woman myself. The missing women in your poems. What is it that is making us look for our own feminist histories through the figure of, say, an analogous figure of Judith Shakespeare? I mean, these 100 years, we still are looking for these absent histories.
That's a beautiful question, and really, I don't know that I have the answer, but I think that, so for instance, the poem that I wrote in this book, I found a village and in it were all our missing women. It was basically about reading how about 21 million women had been denied the right to vote because they had been kept off the registrar, which is a large number of women. And so they are not like, it's not missing in the most horrible way, but just they don't exist because they can't vote, you know? So there was this sense of all the different kinds of vanishings that happen. And then I thought, well, what would it be to find them all of a sudden? What would be, it's a kind of almost utopian sort of journey to say like, oh, there's a place and they're all here, surprise! And, you know, and they were quite militant in the poem, that also surprised me. You know, that they were angry, and also this this sense of how can you vanish these large numbers that we have actually as a country. Yeah. It's an astonishing, it's in millions. Yeah. And so what does that do then to people, for those of us who are here and who have survived for whatever reason, and how do you contend with that? And so I think the reason why we're all writing is because there's a need to try to find a thread. There's a need to excavate in some way. And I don't know what that does, but obviously the need is very strong to acknowledge, at the very least. But why don't you talk a little bit about why you wanted to write about that? I'm very curious to hear.
I think without turning it into a manifesto, I wouldn't say many of us, I think all of us, whether we are writing or not, have been challenging the idea of history. It's very masculinist, very patriarchal, in the sense of history has been about events and presences. Yeah. This is what happened. This is what history has not been about, what has not happened. So Virginia Woolf takes this up, that where is Judith Shakespeare? Where is Shakespeare's sister? I think we are all looking for our sisters in various places, as sisters and daughters. And one of the best gifts of writing has not, at least for me, given where I, kind of spent my life, has been to discover this sisterhood. To know that I can write something, and even if I know that I don't need to be liked. I don't need to be friends with you. But there would be a group of women who will be my sisters, the invisible sisters. So one of the best things about our generation, I think, of women has been the discovery of these female friendships that were denied, I think, again, because of various machinations, patriarchal machinations to a generation of, my mothers and grandmothers. I know I have to rush. Just two questions. One is I want to ask you whether you are aware of moving towards certain forms you are researching. I use this word almost as a joke, because how do poets research, right? But using the mandala, using the Speedo poem, the Ebisedirian poem. So are you conscious of this phase in your career?
Yeah. I mean, I think this book, there's a lot of that. And again, because I wrote it a lot during the pandemic, and it was this very strange disembodied time. And so that was the only way to find form, was by giving these poems a kind of body and form. And so that's why I have the menstrual cup as an offering to Pliny. I have, a poem in the form of a fir tree. I have a yoni poem. I have a lot of, which I enjoyed, and I also wanted to bring together a sense of irreverence and humor and all the concerns that I have. So form was, and not just shapes, but also, Sistinas or Abecedarians or whatever. They allow somehow within the constraint, there's a sense of freedom that happens with the poem, and it's not, it's sort of, you don't decide to write a poem like that. Yeah, you suddenly think that, oh, this poem demands a form, and then you have to find the right form. So yeah, I'm aware of that.
The contract, that is the opening of Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods. I'm very fond of this poem. There's a line for those of you who might not have read it yet or cannot remember. There's a line there which goes, so Tishani setting up a contract with her reader, and the line is, the various things that she'll do for the reader. One is, lower my head into countless ovens. So all of you get that literary path. What was your ambition in setting up that literary history and connecting it with your own writing or the Girls Coming Out of the Woods?
So Plath was a very important poet for me when I started writing. And I remember my mother being very worried. I was taking out all these books from the American consulate, and it was Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath. And she was like, I'm not sure about you wanting to become a poet, you know. And I think, you know, there is this sense of, yes, I'll follow you, I'll whisper in your ear, I'll do all this, but I'll also put my head in an oven. You know, this metaphorical, so some literal, this mixture of the literal and this idea of an absolutely relentless poet, which is, I did have a phase of wanting to be a very evangelistic type of poet, and I've kind of gotten over that now, so. But there's this sense of, the poem ends with the mosquito buzzing in the ear, you know, and that is not only just annoying, but the mosquito can also give you a life-threatening disease. So I'm trying to like take the poet out of just the purely romantic sense of, as a teenager, you know, Plath is this very romantic figure. So all the versions of what it can be to kind of be insistent and to be persistent and to just not go away. Because I think on one level, I feel so passionately about poetry and what poetry can do. And then when I meet people who don't read poetry and for whom poetry seems to be this inaccessible, difficult thing, I really feel like I want to make the bridge. And if it's not my poetry, let's read some other poetry. But you have to find poems that you love because they are the most primal form that we have, and there is a sense of, I don't know, the greatness of a poem is that it's so small and its effects are so large, and so why would you want to deny yourself this beautiful experience? So that's how I feel, and I still feel that sense of what I want from a poem is a sense of transformation. I want to have a sense of wonder. I want to be surprised. I want to be led into something that I can't fully know, into mystery. And I think that's why I write poetry, but that's also why I read poetry.
Yeah, I think to be infected, that is why the mosquito might be a risk carrier, but it's a risk worth taking to be bitten by that kind of, yeah. Last question before we open it to the house. Are you able to remember jokes? I am unable to remember. And
please don't ask me to tell a joke.
Yeah,
absolutely cannot.
So if you ask me to tell a joke, I cannot. I cannot remember any joke. And I wanted to ask you. I'm glad to know I'm not the only one. Why do you think we are able to remember lines of poems that we met 40 years ago, but not a joke?
Jokes are ephemeral in a way, and I think that in a sense that you can hear the same joke that you heard 5 years ago or 2 weeks ago, and you can, it's like, oh yeah, I know that one, and you laugh, but it sort of just falls off like water. I never have a capacity but I have a capacity to memorize poems, and I like to know poems, but there's just something about jokes where they're very, you know, and some people are very good at it. That's their way of maybe interacting, is that they have all these jokes. I think kids collect jokes. They have, like, have you heard this joke? The knock-knock jokes, you know? Yeah. I know maybe one or two of those.
Yeah,
but I think that it's maybe also that jokes are very difficult. Jokes are much harder than poems in a way, because to really land a joke, I mean, it has to be good. Otherwise, it's just a dad joke, and that's not fun. So,
I was also thinking of Robert Frost, for instance, saying that if you've read something, you come to the last line, and if you feel the desire to rush to the first line immediately, only then is it a poem. That doesn't happen with a joke, right? I think maybe there's something about that.
Yeah, maybe that sense of the punchline being the final thing, and then it's boom, on to the next. Whereas the poem is more circular, and so it feeds into itself and you go back. That could be, again,
so
a question
nice
of
talking to you. I'll not deprive people in the audience from asking their questions. Yeah, Gitanjali, are we running short of time? Okay.
Just introduce yourself. Yeah. Keep it brief. Thank you.
The name's Yogesh. Tishani, for all of us in the audience, we are fascinated how you people pick up birds and give it such a beautiful form that they stay with us, right? If you look at creative beat music and poems here, a large number of people say that best of creativity, take Mr. Rahman who does music, it says it comes from a place of silence. Whereas you just now shared that, when I look at how my journey in terms of coming up with those words, it's driven by desire. And I kind of think, and there's that whole energy around that. So could you reflect on that? Is there that element of silence as well that comes in when you reflect on? And I'll just put in a short question to Sumana as well. In popular, be it Bollywood or Hollywood, poets always have that larger than life connect and everybody looks up to them. I mean, you can pick up movies where the main character's been that. But you just now mentioned that there is a large segment of people today which don't connect at all. Any reason for that? I mean, considering in popular culture, all the rock stars, musicians, any movie on anything to do with poets and musicians are blockbusters. So why is that?
I think, to speak to silence and Mr. A.R. Rahman, I think, that notion of, he's working with sound and music, and so obviously the silence is like for us, the empty page, right? The blank spaces, the breath. That is also a kind of silence, deciding how much blank space the page is going to have. And so it is also coming from the idea of you're putting words into silence. You're creating words, you're making a poem where there was nothing, that blank page. So silence is a very beautiful idea philosophically, and also I think literally thinking about pages and layouts and how we draw up language and where we get it from. And I will just clarify to say that, I'm talking about I would not presume to speak for poetic traditions across the world. I know, for instance, that there are many, many places where poets are like rock stars. There is a poetry festival in Medellin where thousands of people go and listen to poetry. And certainly I would say that maybe not Indian English poets. I don't think that we are rock stars or we have that.
You certainly are.
I feel like it's a very small and committed and nice group, but it's not like, it's not like soldiers carrying Neruda in their pocket instead of a pair of socks. We're just not that relevant, and we're not that, I think that the role of the poet has also perhaps changed and is changing, and there's no one role. There's many different ways of being a poet. And so I think we're in an exciting age where we have the internet, and poetry is elastic, Poetry can work with music, it can work with film, it can work with image, sound, performance, dance. So it's the most elastic of forms, I think. So it's an exciting time. But in terms of numbers and in terms of audience, it's never going to be Bollywood. It's never going to be hugely sort of. What do you think, Sumana? I mean, it's not like I don't know.
I'm thinking of a film. Can't remember the name. Pal Do Pal Ka Shayar Hu. Kabhi Kabhi. So you see, I'll just think of two. Maybe I'll try to answer your question. Not answer, but respond to your question with the example, because you mentioned Hindi cinema. With the example of two Hindi films, मैं पल दो पल का शायर हूँ. My Hindi is very bad, and Amitesh is here, so I just don't want to kind of, Amitesh, forgive my pronunciation. मुझसे पहले, what's the line? So there have been poets before. Sarah? No, मुझसे पहले भी शायर, yeah. So that sense that there have been many before me and there will be many after me. But still I am here. This is a lucky moment for me that I am here. And it's in an auditorium such as this one, except that it's in a college. it is very easy to identify a poet and for the poet to say, whatever, मैं पल दो पल का शायर हूँ, लेकिन मैं शायर हूँ. To even accept that to oneself is very difficult. I want to take you now to a different situation, to Pyasa. What's the song? ये दुनिया अगर मिल भी जाए तो क्या है? Think of where the poet is. Here, in the Kabhi Kabhi song, Amitabh Bachchan is on the stage. If Tishani is on the stage, it is very easy to identify a poet. In the film Pyasa, Rahman, the publisher, is on the stage. Gurudutt has to enter from that side. The audience, and I'm using this as a metaphor, the audience is conditioned to recognize the person on the stage as a poet. So Gurudutt is very, 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 very wise, as in, if you remember, whatever, Daulat bhi le lo, isn't that how it begins? And he makes the entire audience turn their heads backwards. So it is, Tishani read out her poems here, but there is a poet just 2 seats away from you, Shruti Sareen. It is up to us also, or Sarabjit, or Shamai, there's so many poets in the audience today. It is up to us to recognize that there are poets also out there who may not necessarily be on the stage. At the door, and always will be kept out, as we know, by this publisher. And so, yeah.
Hi, I'm Akshada. And since we were talking of sisterhood, and you said that you dedicated a book to your mother, I was just, as a fellow writer myself, I'm really interested in the idea of the relationship that we share as daughters with our mothers, and the kind of things that we inherit from our mothers, which they have inherited from their mothers. And there's a similarity that I feel, there's a pattern that that is similar to the experiences of women all across. And I was just wondering if you could talk about the influence your mother has had on your poetry as well.
And also that snow and rose thing, what a beautiful dedication.
I mean, I'll just say that, yes, these are obviously, you know, family is a very important influence for us in a good or bad way. We grow up in a certain environment, we respond to that as writers. But honestly, I don't come from a literary family. No one in my family is really much into the idea of writing, so I don't even know that anybody in my family reads my books. They're happy that I'm writing and that I seem to enjoy it and I'm able to publish books. But I don't think they really get it. And I've never gone to them for that conversation. I've always found my own family in that sense. I've had conversations with fellow writers, but even just other people who are not writers, but who love books and who connect with language. And I find that, that I don't want to be overly invested in just the familial ties. I know that they are powerful. But today I went to the National Museum and I saw the dancing girl of Mohenjo-daro. I can't tell you how excited I was to see that small, because I am connected to her. I feel I'm connected to her. I want to draw my ancestry wherever, and not just because it's in India, you know. I would also want to draw my ancestry to the poet Rilke, because when he was 26, he went to Paris and he met his mentor, who was Rodin. When I was 26, I met my mentor Chandralekha. And I can draw my ancestors from wherever I want, because I draw them not by blood, but by language, by experience. I think it's more to do with connection, right? It's to do with ties, and what are we connecting to, and what do we need? And if we are not able to get it from the thing that's around us, where do we find it, and how do we nourish ourselves? So I think we have to all expand our notion of family, and I think we have to expand our notion of ancestry, and then we can understand what does it mean to belong to something, rather than to be narrow in that idea, you know. And so having said all that, I mean, of course, I have many poems about my mother, and I think there is this, and my father, and I've written about them. I've written a novel, and you know, I've definitely explored that, because there is this sense of one's own mythology. Where do I come from? Who are my people? And when you don't come always from one place, which I don't, from very, very, you know, far-flung places, there is a sense of wanting to gather up, and a sense of where am I going to ground myself, which is why I have so many damn poems about Madras, because I have nothing genealogically to do with Madras, but that's where I was born, and that's where I keep going back to, and that is going to be in all my poems. Whereas other places which are actually in my landscape, Kutch, Wales, these will be wispy places that my elsewheres, you know? And I think I try to deal with all these things in the writing, and I feel as we have to be cognizant of you know, all these connections and missed connections, and try to make those, yeah, ancestors and find them.
Yeah. Where's Gitanjali? She'll have to.
I think everybody can hear me. So I just walked in and I picked up the book, and this was the first poem that I actually looked at, why the Brazilian butt lift won't save us. So I want to introduce myself. So I actually read about you in a magazine. I think it was Vogue or Architectural Digest, where they're talking about your house, and you know, like I have visuals of that. And what stood out to me was your name. So my name is Tisha Dash, and your name is Tishani Doshi. So I was like, okay, she's a poet. In my mind, when I was in school, I was a poet, but I'm not. And I'm a doctor. I'm an aesthetic dermatologist. So this is the poem which I picked up. And it was so funny, because that's what I do. I do Botox, I do fillers, I do body contouring. I want to understand what it means, because to me, because I'm a very literal person, the last line says, what's a needle the size of your life? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I wrote the poem because I had heard a program about many women who were doing this Brazilian butt lift. For those of you who don't know, that's when and you can correct me about the specifics of this operation, but from what I understand it, there's a sort of things go from other parts of the body into the butt to plump it up, right? This is the sort of Kardashian ass, which is this is what is the ideal at the moment, right? So I had been reading about several women who died because they went to what we would call the sort of back street places with quack doctors who put some kind of mix of concrete into them or whatever it is, and they died. And so I was just trying to, and also I'm writing a lot of poems about aging and what does it mean to be, I have a poem called To My First White Hairs, and this paradox of wanting to sort of age gracefully, and then freaking out when the white hairs start to come, and then worrying about it. And what does it mean actually to be okay with one's body? And not just to be okay with it, but to fall in love with one's own body. I have another poem, you know, about arriving at my own body after many years and sort of being a pilgrim to my own self, you know. And I think for me, very much, the poem was trying to understand why, like, is it worth your life? I mean, you're dead. Who cares what your butt looks like? You're dead. So I just felt like that was the impulse of the poem, to say, what is this where we, and so it's not judgment about, oh, you shouldn't do Botox, and oh, you shouldn't do this. You should do whatever you feel, because I think that autonomy of one's body is your decision. But I don't think, I think I wanted to explore my own ambivalence with this sense of, oh, I am aging, and I feel the lines, and I feel this, and I feel that. And I am constantly reminded of this every time I wake up and I go into my day, because women's, and not just women, everybody's bodies are being held up to all kinds of ideals and standards which are impossible. And so the poem is trying to talk back to that. But that very literally, that last line is about, you know, a needle the size of your life, as in it might kill you. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay,
I think we'll wrap up. And
Yeah, I think this has been a wonderful
go out, yeah.
audience. Gitanjali will.
I know that there was one more question, so maybe maybe you could take it after. But thank you so much, Tishani, for making the long journey here. Of course, and thank you so much, Shimona, for also making quite a long journey here from Sonipat. It's been a lovely evening, and we've enjoyed the poetry. I think I can speak for everyone and say that we also really enjoyed the conversation and could probably go on for a very long time. So thank you so much. You've left. Actually, there are literally things I want to say about what you said, about poetry is primal, but anyway, I'll stop here just to say thank you. Thank you all for coming and for supporting this program. And let's give our two poets a big round of applause.